I don't know, some of you heard the message that I gave last night. This is going to be part 2 on the same subject, so if you have opportunity and you haven't heard the first one, you might go on either right now it's on the Wildwood YouTube channel, and I'll be putting it on mine sometime later, today hopefully. But the title is, What in the World is Going On? This is part 2. Now, of course, we know, all of us, that the virus is going on, but there's a whole lot of ideas out there as to what's behind this and what's really taking place. But I believe that what we should be able to know is that the best answers to what's going on is in the Bible. And so we're going to take a look at one of the Bible prophecies this morning. It's found in Revelation 13, verses 11 and 12. And you're familiar with the fact that Revelation 13 talks about two beasts that will have leading roles in the final events of Earth's history. And the one that we're going to look at is the second beast, starting with verse 11. It says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth." Now, the first beast came up out of the sea, and that's generally in the Bible where the powers arise from, because water represents a lot of people. So then, if water represents a lot of people, then when a beast comes out of the earth, it's talking about a sparsely populated area. It has some people, but it's not heavily populated. So that's one clue as to who the power is. And he had two horns, like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Here it's telling us the way this power begins in the beginning and the way it ends at the end. It is telling us that the two horns represent actually two factors: separation of church and state, to where the government does not feel that it should control the church or the religion of the country, and that the activities of church and state should stay separate. But it also means a country that would have what we call republicanism, or the leaders would be chosen by the people. In most countries, there are certain families that either inherit the leadership or they find some way to grab the leadership. But in this country, it would be leaders that were elected by the people. And also, the other horn would represent, it would be a Protestant nation, a nation of people who believed in the Bible, whose roots were in the Reformation, and were actually persecuted for their faith in the old world, but came to this world and recognized the need to have Protestantism as the religion, and to have the power to choose their leadership. Now, as we look at those factors, we don't have too hard a time to figure out who it is. But the thing that we want to especially notice today is that this beast, this country, is going to end up speaking like a dragon. And so we need to watch for that. When we see those kind of things happening, then it's a warning that we are near the end, that there's not much more time when the government of that country starts speaking like a dragon. Then it goes on to say how far as a dragon it's going to go. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Now, we don't have time this morning to study the first beast, but let's look at some of the things that the first beast did. And I forgot to put the text down here, but it's just a few verses above. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God. Now, this is a supposedly religious power, but he opens his mouth in blasphemy against God. So the second beast is going to do the same, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. So it's like these two beasts get to the point where they're speaking against all of the powers of heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. So here we see that one of the things they're going to do is persecute those who don't listen to their dragon speaking, and that there will be a lot of difficulties and problems. While I was gone, I had the privilege to read a book that's pretty well advertised. It's not an Adventist author, but his name was Pastor Wurmbrandt. I forget his first name. But he grew up in Romania, and it was during communism, and he was a pastor, and soon he got in trouble because the government was going to tell him what he could preach and so on, and he wasn't willing to do that, so he had to end up going in underground church and working with them. For a while he was able to do both, but he finally became imprisoned. He spent 14 years in prison, but God's blessing got him out of prison, and someone paid a ransom, and he actually got out of the country, and he has started an organization that especially ministers to those that are in prison for their faith. And even in the midst of this persecution, people would go to church out in the woods at midnight rather than to be denied the privilege of going to church. Now, if there happened to be somebody that, saw them, why, many of them could have been in prison. They could have been tortured. They usually were if they went to prison, and so on. And yet they considered that so valuable to meet with their fellow church members that they would do it at the risk of their life. And, I'm not saying that applies right now to our situation. It's a little different. But I do think that God has said very clearly, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, so much more as you see the day approaching. And therefore, there's some benefit for us getting together that is valuable to us, especially in the last days. So, as I read that book and realized what had been decided here in this country, that the churches should be closed, until this is over. I understand, better the big ones for sure, as there's so many people that go there. But I thought, for a little one like us, I hope we don't have to do that. I thought the board was going to vote to close it while I was gone, but I learned that they didn't do that. So that's why we still meant today. But this power is going to do the same things that the first beast did. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And therefore we see the reason it's presented together in Revelation 13 is that these two powers will end up working very closely together. And then as we go back to the second beast and we read Revelation 13:15 and onward, it says, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Now we know what the issue is here. It's the day of worship. It's okay if the government says you can't work on Sunday. We're not to oppose that. Instead, we're to take Sunday and do soul-winning work on that day. But if they say you can't worship on Sabbath on the seventh day of the week, then we have to go underground. That's all we can do. Because if we worship in our church, of course, they'll come and throw us out and lock the doors, and we won't be able to do that. So, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here we have a very clear rundown on the worst deeds of this second power. When it becomes like a dragon, the very principles that that country was started on will be completely abandoned, and it will now speak the same as the countries that those people fled from, and therefore it will be the same in that country as it has been during the Reformation time and the time of papal supremacy. So, just in list form, here's what happens when the Lamb turns to a dragon. They will commit blasphemy. They will become a persecuting power. They will require everyone to worship on Sunday, which is the day of worship of the first beast. The time will come where they pass an economic boycott. Now I know that we've always taught that that's going to happen before the close of probation. I did an intense study on that some time ago, and I am fairly sure that it doesn't come before the close of probation. I don't know that we've stopped to think that if you can't buy one thing and you can't sell one thing, about how are you going to exist? However, I did discover that prices of all things will rise tremendously. And I wouldn't be surprised that if this crisis passes, which I sort of think it will, but maybe not as fast as they're hoping, when this crisis goes past, that prices are going to skyrocket. And so it's not that you can't buy and sell, but you can't afford to buy and sell because you don't have the money to buy. And that we're going to face before the close of probation. But after the close of probation, we don't need to buy and sell anyway, because we have to depend 100% on God. Even for our food, we have to depend on Him. Everything. Place to be, Everything we depend on Him. But they're going to do it because of our stubbornness, that we won't give in. And so they're going to say, we'll get them. We'll take away their ability to buy and sell. And yet God takes care of us, so we keep on going. And finally, the death penalty is enacted. And all of these things are going to take place when that country speaks as a dragon. Now let's look at some of the counsel that we have in light of what's ahead of us. This comes from Christian Service, page 52 and 3. The restraining Spirit of God is even now being withdrawn from the world. Hurricanes, storms, tempests, fire, and flood, disasters by sea and land follow each other in quick succession. Does that look like what we've been going through the last 20 years or maybe more? I mean, absolutely what's going on. But you know what? People are not listening. All these things happen because the Spirit is being withdrawn. And of course, most of them are blaming God that He's the one doing these things. But it's not God, it's Satan. And the reason Satan is able to do more is because the Spirit is being withdrawn. And so, apparently, as the Spirit is being withdrawn, a bigger lesson had to be given to the human race. And that is the pestilence that is upon us, the COVID virus. Now, if we don't listen to that, what's going to happen next? And it says, science seeks to explain all these. So the scientists and the theologians of the day, they don't tell the people that the Spirit's being withdrawn, and that's why this is happening. They come up with what seems reasonable explanations for all these things. The signs of the Son of God are attributed to any and other than the true cause. And unfortunately, even Christian people are not telling the public. They're not explaining. Now, that's one thing I have a burden to do here during this time, is to explain what is the real reason for these disasters, and especially this one. Going on, men cannot discern the sentinel angels restraining the four winds, that they shall not blow until the servants of God are sealed. But when God shall bid his angels loose the winds, there shall be such a scene of strife as no pen can picture. In other words, it's going to be so much worse than what we have right now that people will, be incredibly amazed at how bad it is. God still has not let go of the four winds, because when he does, it's the close of probation. Nobody can change sides after that. If they haven't given their life into the hands of Jesus, it's too late to do it. And therefore, we can still offer mercy. We can still offer hope to anybody, no matter how sinful or neglectful they've been. We can offer that to them, but maybe not for very long. The days in which we live are solemn and important. The Spirit of God is gradually but surely being withdrawn from the earth. Plagues and judgments are already falling upon the despisers of the grace of God. Now, one thing that I noticed very strongly and presented it last night is that it's not the non-Christian world that is the main cause of this problem. It is the Christian world. God understands that the people who don't know anything about Jesus, or who have had a bad example and they don't see any reason to be a Christian, So they're just living their life. They don't put their trust in the Bible, but the Christians say that they do, and they claim they do, and yet they're disobeying. And so these plagues and judgments are falling upon the despisers of the grace of God, talking about the Christians that are despising the grace of God. The calamities by land and sea, the unsettled state of society, the alarms of war are portentous. Now that's written in past tense, and it was written over 100 years ago. If it was that scary back then, what is it now? It certainly has increased. They forecast approaching events of the greatest magnitude. The agencies of evil are combining their forces and consolidating. So Satan has had all this time to get different groups of people who want to accomplish certain things. And they have been given time to develop their plans to where they can really tighten things down. They are strengthening for the last great crisis. Great changes are soon to take place in our world. Don't you think what's happened over the last few weeks is a direct fulfillment of that sentence? I have never seen so many changes happen in this country ever in my lifetime. Very fast. And I don't know. The Lord didn't let us know it all before we left the country. But if we had known all of what would happen, maybe we would have been lacking in faith to go. I don't know. But we didn't know. And yet, as we were there, far from home, and watching the developments in this situation, wow, when I read that sentence, or remembered that sentence, I thought that sure applies. Great changes are soon to take place in our world, and the final movements will be rapid ones. So this shows how fast things can develop. I think most people are thinking, before this crisis came especially, they were thinking that we have still quite a bit of time yet because the gospel still needs to go to the world. But when you watch how fast things happen in this crisis, it's not going to take long to take the gospel to the world. All it takes is a few Daniels and Esthers, and it can go to the world. The time is at hand when there will be sorrow in the world that no human balm can heal. That's beginning already, I believe. And it's interesting, Margarita was impressed with that quote as well. But, you know, when a loved one dies, and dies as fast as they die from this virus, it's really a heart-wrenching experience. And it says there's going to be so much sorrow that there's not going to be any way to heal that sorrow. It's just going to spread everywhere. The Spirit of God is being withdrawn. That's why this is happening. Disasters by sea and by land follow one another in quick succession. How frequently we hear of earthquakes and tornadoes, of destruction by fire and flood, with great loss of life and property. We had our own personal experience in that. For quite a few years, we had a little piece of property. I mean, we still have the property, with a little cabin up in the little town of Lobelville. That's an area where many Adventists are moving to get in the country. It's very country up there. And in fact, we don't have any neighbors for probably a mile or more. We did have, but they all got too old or something happened to their property, and so nobody's up there. But we thought we should go and take a look at our property. We hadn't been there quite a while. And what we didn't know is there'd been a tornado that went through, and there was a big double trunk tree that toppled right over on the cabin, pushed the cabin clear off of its foundation, and split the cabin in two. And to make it even worse, there was another big tree on the other side of the cabin, and it fell on my tool shed and smashed it in half. And so we don't have anything. And as I first looked on that scene, I thought, wow, I didn't expect this. And this is what's going to happen with all these terrible things, because the Spirit is being withdrawn. Apparently, these calamities are capricious outbreaks of disorganized, unrelated forces of nature, wholly beyond the control of man. Well, that's true. It's beyond the control of man. But in them all, God's purpose may be read. Now, God isn't the one that's trying to destroy people with these storms and all that. But when Christians disobey and they don't follow their Bible, it pushes the Spirit away. And the Spirit is being driven out. When the Spirit goes away, it gives more power to Satan. And that's what he's doing. He enjoys that. You know, why would anybody want to serve a master that if he gets a chance will kill them? But that's the way Satan is. He wants to kill his subjects before they can accept Jesus. They are among the agencies by which he seeks to arouse men and women to a sense of their danger. That's where Romans 8:28 comes in. Satan sends a disaster, but God takes that and uses it to try to wake up people. But if he can't wake them up, more will get destroyed. In Counsels on Health, 506, says, as religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions. Now, some are saying that after this crisis is over, there may be some lawsuits for interfering with religious liberty. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that wouldn't happen, because definitely we are not being allowed the amount of religious liberty that we should have in this crisis. But I don't think it's our job to defy the government in this issue. For their own sake, they should, while they have opportunity, become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. So I thank God for the connection to Wildwood and for the knowledge that medical missionary work is the last work that we need to be able to do, because we will be allowed to work even in times of persecution when those that don't have that ability will be stopped. And, all that people have, they'll give for their skin. So when the hospitals get full and they can't go to the hospital, they'll be glad if there's somebody that can do something, even in their home or, somewhere. And that's the counsel that we have for this hour. And those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. So I think it's beginning now. This quotation is starting now, that it is scaring the hospital system. There are people that are being told you can't come to the hospital because you got to be able to take care of these people with the virus. And so we're already there to where people cannot get the service that they should have and used to have. There will be suffering ones, plenty of them, who will need help, not only among those of our own faith, but largely among those who know not the truth. So as always, those that are of our faith should have the first care. We should take care of them first, but then more energy can be put into those that are not of our faith, and God can use that to bring the truths for this time to them. The shortness of time demands an energy that has not been aroused among those who claim to believe the present truth. So that's us. And I'm afraid we're guilty even now with this crisis falling upon us so suddenly, and we weren't ready for it. The shortness of time demands an energy that has not been aroused among those who claim to believe the present truth. There is need of personal religion. So here's some of the important things that need to be in full advance. Our own personal religion. I'll just give you one illustration. I don't think as Seventh-day Adventists we should be as afraid as the people of the world. We shouldn't. But many of us are. We're just as afraid as the people of the world. Now, I'm all for all the precautions that we're told to take. I think we ought to take all of those because we don't want to hurt our fellow men, especially our fellow church members. But the fear itself may make some people sick, because if you think you're going to get sick, it probably will get you. Just the effect of the mind upon the individual. So there is need of personal religion to where we can have a relationship with Jesus like he had with his Father, and we're not disturbed by how many people get sick. Second thing it mentions of repentance. So whatever sins we have done or we fall into, we need to be quick to ask forgiveness for that, of faith and love. So faith leads us to still do the work that God has given us, whatever method we have to use, however we can find a way to work, we are to do it, and the love that should exist for those that are lost. Those are things that the shortness of time demands it, but God says you didn't have it like you should have. So now there's still time to develop that. I plead that there be a general awakening among us as a people. And I really believe what Dr. Grievous read, fear should not be the motivation that we are motivated by, nor should we try to motivate other people by fear. But Jesus did give the signs so that we would know when the time was near. And this is one of those signs that we see right now. And so he is pleading with this sign that there be a general awakening among us as a people. Now someone texted this to me. Here's another development. I don't know if there are any other ones have heard about it. Anyone here? But here's a statement made by the United Kingdom Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. He was the former Prime Minister on Thursday. And the only reference I could get is it was by Simon Kent, whoever he is. But here's what he is proposing. Now is the time for global leaders to create one world government to tackle the twin medical and economic crises caused by the Chinese coronavirus pandemic. So that's a solution that's being proposed, and I'm sure you've heard in the past that there are those that are aiming as fast as they can get to a one world government. And when that one world government takes place, you can be sure that religious liberty is out the window. But I don't want to leave you on that note. As we close this message, I read these thoughts from Desire of Ages, page 336. This is a little comment on the experience that the disciples had when they were crossing the lake and a terrible storm came up. Jesus was in the boat, but they forgot that he was in the boat, and they panicked and they were totally afraid. None of them were saying, "We don't need to worry about this storm. Jesus is in our boat." Or they could have said, "If it's our time to die, so be it. Jesus, whatever he works out is good enough for us." They weren't saying that. They were panicking. They were trying to save the boat. As Jesus rested by faith in the Father's care, so we are to rest in the care of our Savior. If the disciples had trusted him, they would have been kept in peace. Now there's a if there. They weren't trusting in him. They weren't saying Jesus is in the boat. They were not trusting in Jesus. But if they had, they would have been kept at peace. Their fear in the time of danger revealed their unbelief. In their efforts to save themselves, they forgot Jesus. And it was only when in despair of self-dependence, in other words, they did everything they possibly could to save the boat, and they saw it wasn't going to happen. They turned to him that he could give them help. So Jesus had to wait until they had exhausted all their energies and done everything they knew to do and failed, and then Jesus said, "Now I can help them." Well, let's not be like the disciples on that occasion. Now, I'm human like all of us, and there have been moments when fear came in to my mind. But because of the things I've been reading and so on, I asked the Lord to take it away, because I don't think that he wants us to have the fear that other people have. And for sure, we can't save ourselves. When you really stop to think how this virus is passed, you can wash your hands every hour like they suggest. You can stay 6 feet away from everybody. And you can do all the things that they're telling us to do, and the virus can get you anyway. It's, if that virus is on some surface that you touch, and you touch some part of your face and so on, you may get it. And so human effort, while I believe we should do what we can, human effort is not going to save the day. And so we need to really put our whole trust in him. Going on, it says, how often the disciples' experience is ours. When the tempests of temptation gather, and the fierce lightnings flash, and the waves sweep over us, we battle with the storm alone, forgetting that there is one who can help us. We trust to our own strength till our hope is lost and we are ready to perish. Then we remember Jesus, and if we call upon him to save us, we shall not cry in vain. Amen. So, as we are in this storm of the coronavirus, the same message, I believe, would be given to us by Jesus that was given to his disciples there on the lake. As long as you try to solve your problems by your own power, you will not be able to solve them. But if you will trust in me, I can solve your problems. Now that doesn't mean nobody that's trusting in God won't die of the virus. We do have to pray, thy will be done. We can ask him not to let us die, but we have to leave the final call for him to do. And then, of course, even if we got the virus and we had a serious case, he wants us to pray for healing and do the things we can do. But if he doesn't heal us, then we trust him anyway. But I would guess that many people will get healed who caught the virus because they put their trust in him. And many people are going to be spared the virus because they trusted in him. And so this lesson, I believe, is very important. And this is the last part we'll read. Though he sorrowfully reproves our unbelief and self-confidence, he never fails to give us the help we need. Isn't that a loving Savior? He doesn't say, well, you didn't trust me up till now, so I'm not going to help you. No, as soon as we recognize our need of help, and of course we've been praying already for quite a while that the Lord will spare us and our family and this church, and God's people will spare us from this. But in those times, if we, fear comes in, he doesn't rebuke us after we have been sorry, and he always will give us the help that we need. Whether on the land or on the sea, if we have the Savior in our hearts, there is no need of fear. How much need? None. No need of fear. Living faith in the Redeemer will smooth the sea of life and will deliver us from danger in the way that he knows to be best. Amen. From this point on, death is definitely not the worst thing that could happen to us. When we know the future, what the future holds, death is not the biggest disaster. If we get sick but recover, what a blessing. Now we have antibodies. We can go anywhere and we're safe. We can preach the gospel with power. And if he protects us from getting it at all, then what a blessing that is. So let us put our full, complete trust in him as to what will happen, and he will not deny us. He will not let us down. However he wants it to work out, we have to be satisfied with that, but he won't let us down. And when we get to heaven, if something happened that we wish hadn't happened, we're going to find out it was the best thing that could happen to us. And he explains it all, why he let it happen. He will never neglect one of his true children.